California politics.
Yeah, it focuses on Governor Newsom's reaction to a federal court ruling, specifically about who controls the National Guard.
And our source for this deep dive, it's the transcript, right, of the governor speaking just after that ruling landed.
That's right. So it's a single source, gives us a very specific window, one perspective, really, on this whole legal and political tangle.
That tension between federal and state power.
Especially, yeah, when it involves military assets, law enforcement roles. It gets complicated.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And our mission really is to kind of cut through the noise here. We want to pull out the most important bits from this speech.
Understand what the source says about the court's ruling itself, what it meant for the Guard.
And the bigger picture stuff the governor was hitting on, things like executive power, constitutional limits.
And he also gets into the human side, too, describing some federal actions. We need to understand those points as presented in the source.
Exactly. It's about grabbing those key insights, maybe some surprising details, and getting to the heart of what this transcript tells us. So settle in. Let's jump into what was happening, according to this account.
Okay.
So kicking things off, right at the core, what does this source actually tell us about the essence of that federal court decision on the National Guard?
Well, the speaker in the transcript, the governor, he presents it as the federal judge basically siding against the administration, specifically ordering control of the Guard back to him, back to the governor.
And the key reason given in the source?
He cites Section 12406. The transcript quotes him saying this part of the law needs an invasion or rebellion for the feds to take command of state Guard units.
Right, and according to this account, he pretty much calls those conditions absurd in this situation.
Precisely. He frames the ruling as, a win for constitutional principles, a pushback against what he's calling overreach and authoritarian tendencies.
The language sounds pretty direct in the transcript.
Oh, yeah. He states the president pushed the boundaries, pushed the limit, but no longer can push this state around any longer. That's a quote from the source.
Okay, so based on this source, what's the immediate, practical effect of this ruling for the Guard itself?
He's very clear on that in the transcript, the timeline, the outcome. He says the Guard comes back under his authority fast by noon tomorrow.
By noon tomorrow. Wow.
And he specifies what they'll go back to doing.
Which, as he describes it, includes things they were doing before this whole thing started.
Yes. Duties like border security operations, counter-drug, fentanyl enforcement.
He even mentioned something called rattlesnake teams, focused on vegetation management.
Yeah, for wildfire season, which is obviously huge in California, he emphasizes they were, quote, taken off these vital duties by the previous administration.
And now they're returning to those, plus their day jobs, which he mentions are law enforcement roles inside the state.
Exactly. And this is where the source really draws a sharp contrast
between what the governor thinks the Guard should be doing
and what he claims they were being used for under federal command.
Which would voice?
He puts it very bluntly, being commandeered to do icy raids. That's the phrase used in the source.
Wow.
He makes a really direct claim in the transcript. These folks are now being commandeered to do icy raids. You've seen the photographs. That ends tomorrow at noon.
That's a powerful claim presented there, directly linking the federal deployment to immigration enforcement. And the critique in this transcript, it doesn't just stop with the Guard, does it? It broadens out.
No, it touches on other incidents, too, and this part is particularly striking. The speaker includes a very specific anecdote about Senator Alex Padilla.
What does the source say happened there?
It describes Senator Padilla being handcuffed, thrown to the ground, inside a federal building in California.
Just for trying to ask a question.
That's how it's presented, yeah.
Yeah.
Trying to ask a question at a press conference. The governor calls it a disgrace in the transcript.
And he emphasizes Padilla's normally mild manner.
Right, suggesting this was just an extreme, totally unwarranted response. It's used in the source as this vivid example of the kind of actions the speaker feels he's reacting against.
Portraying it as an attack on a respected figure for just, asking something.
Yeah. And the source also mentions the potential use of active duty military, not just the Guard.
Right, the Marines are mentioned. The governor says in the transcript there's been rhetoric about deploying them.
But it doesn't appear they have been, though he suggests the intent was maybe there to make people believe it.
And then he makes a really strong statement on principle, doesn't he?
He does. Police do policing, military for the battlefield. That's the core idea.
And he calls the idea of using United States active duty Marines To militarize the streets of an American city, an abomination.
Abomination, yeah. And attributes this intention to what he calls, quote, vanity theater to instill fear.
That language, abomination, it's incredibly strong in the source. It really hammers home the point presented in the transcript about keeping military and domestic law enforcement separate.
Definitely. And what's fascinating is how the speaker in the transcript weaves these different things together. The guards' alleged role in raids, the Padilla incident, the talk about Marines.
Into a much broader critique of the president's whole approach to governing, as he sees it anyway.
He absolutely doesn't pull any punches in the transcript. He talks about what he views as authoritarian tendencies. Someone who does not believe in the rule of law, does not believe in constraints, does not believe in the Constitution. Strong words.
And he directly challenges the president to follow the court order.
Yes, warning in the source that not doing so could spark a constitutional crisis, the likes of which we haven't seen in our lifetime.
And he asserts he is not a monarch, he is not a king, and he should stop acting like one.
That's quite the statement presented in the source, framing this whole legal fight within the, fundamental structure of American democracy.
But the source also shifts gears a bit, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It moves beyond the high-level legal and political points.
And really delves into the human impact. This is where the transcript provides some incredibly specific and, frankly, quite moving details.
Yeah, the governor recounts meetings he apparently had just the day before with people directly affected by ICE raids.
And these anecdotes are shared in the source to really powerfully underscore the human cost of the actions being discussed.
The stories described are just heartbreaking. The source talks about a 12-year-old boy.
Yeah, weeping because his mother and father, who were agricultural workers for over 20 years, were both disappeared, as the source puts it, leaving the child alone.
And the story of the single mother, surrounded by agents early in the morning, 5:45 a.m.
Taken in a car for almost 2 hours, the source uses the term kidnapping her until she convinced them to let her call her daughter just so her kids could get to school.
And the source says this mother had no criminal record.
None mentioned, and was apparently threatened later by agents saying they might come back.
There's another account mentioned too, right? A young woman whose husband, also with no criminal record,
just disappeared. That's the word used again in the source.
So the speaker uses these really specific, very emotional examples from the source
to forcefully argue against any idea that these actions are just about criminals. He argues they're indiscriminate, they're cruel, and aimed, in his view, at creating chaos.
And he connects that chaos directly to the economy.
Right, specifically mentioning agricultural workers, construction workers, urging listeners, think about who provides your food, who builds your homes.
The source suggests these actions aren't just destroying the foundations of our democracy, but now our economy is at risk.
That really ties the sort of abstract ideas, constitutional law, executive power, back to very tangible economic and social consequences, as portrayed in the transcript anyway.
And the source argues the ruling is important because it's fundamentally about constraints. It's about limits. It's about our democracy.
The source also touches on the roles of the different branches of government. The governor, in the transcript, sounds confident in the judicial branch.
Calls it one of the co-equal branches. Yeah, especially given this ruling. But he also offers a critique of Congress.
Yes, he suggests in the source that Congress has, well, in his view, sort of abdicated any oversight and responsibility over the president.
Which leaves, as presented in the transcript, the courts as maybe the main check left on executive actions.
That seems to be the implication in the source material.
And finally, the source doesn't just rely on institutions. The governor also emphasizes the role of the citizen.
Absolutely. Calls it the most important office, quote, the office of citizen.
Encouraging peaceful pushback, using constitutional rights like assembly, free speech, sharing voices, taking action. It's all described there in the transcript. So, wow, we've covered a lot just from this one source, starting with the specifics of that federal court ruling on the National Guard.
Then moving into Governor Newsom's really strong reactions as presented on executive power, constitutional limits.
And finally diving into those incredibly powerful specific anecdotes he shared about the impact of certain immigration enforcement actions.
Yeah, this deep dive into the transcript, it really highlights how these, seemingly narrow legal decisions can ripple outwards.
Connect to much broader issues: governance, federalism.
the balance between different government branches and, like we saw, the direct, sometimes really dramatic, effects on people's lives as described by the speaker.
Exactly. It makes you think, doesn't it, about all the layers involved when federal and state authorities clash, especially with the military or law enforcement involved on U.S. soil.
And it definitely brings those personal stories, the ones that can get lost in the big headlines, right to the forefront, like those accounts from the source about the ICE raids.
What's also fascinating here is how the speaker really grounds his argument, according to the source, in the rule of law and constitutional principles as the, ultimate check on power.
And also emphasizes the power and maybe the responsibility of citizens to engage peacefully.
Which kind of raises a big question, I think. Considering everything we've discussed, from this source, you get the legal arguments, the political pushback, those deeply personal accounts. How do all those different dimensions really interact in these moments of serious tension between state and federal leaders?
And what does that dynamic, as it's portrayed in this particular speech, imply for the actual balance of power in the country?
Yeah, something for you to perhaps mull over as you go about your day.